go ahead and call to order the special board meeting of the Valley View Board of Education for September 2nd, 2021. Roll call, please.
Mr. Boyd?
Here.
Mr. DeGroat?
Here.
Mr. Gagline?
Here.
Mrs. Iser?
Here.
Mrs. Valenti?
Here, agenda,
Mr.
sorry.
Greenfall?
Here.
Ms. DeVilly?
Here, I apologize. Agenda item 2, discussion of COVID-19 protocols. So it's just a discussion, we don't need a motion or a second or anything like that. So this came about because we were getting ready to start school. At our last board meeting, the board gave direction to Mr. Richards to follow the recommendations or the requirements of the health department. That has since changed with, is it House Bill 22?
House Bill 22, I think there's been just some new learnings.
Okay.
House Bill 22 passed a little while ago, but I think there's been some new understandings of how House Bill 22 interacts with some expectations.
So at the end, I went back and I watched. Mr. Cradlewell said he wanted to stay in school. Ms. DeVilly said it's her senior year, she wants to be in person. Mr. DeGroat wants kids in school. Ms. Iser wants recommendations, mandates followed. Mr. Richards said recommendations and requirements. So that's what the discussion is about. It's not to say whether masks are effective or ineffective, if COVID's real or not real. All we are trying to determine, and correct me if I'm out of line, is we're trying to determine how to keep kids in school. Correct? Right.
And I think the belief is, which I very much welcome, is for you guys to provide me more with feedback. You're 5 people elected from the community to better help with that decision-making process.
Well, and for us to
So-
gather information to see
Yeah.
what on your end, what the administrative team has put in place for us to be successful.
Yeah.
Because we are seeing in the news where schools are going back and having mass quarantine, and so how can we keep kids in school, no matter how that looks? And I think the feedback that you get from us
Yeah,
and the information you give us, hopefully we'll
absolutely.
give further guidance.
Absolutely.
So that's all that this is about.
So I guess I would say, I think there's 3 kind of components to that, Ms. Valenti. One is, what is our take on what to do with masks with that? 2, working with the exemptions, how do we work with that? And then 3, whatever it is that we decide, a timeline for implementation. And so those are, in my mind, the 3 kind of things. And in my mind, it would actually go kind of in those orders as well for discussion. But I think it would be welcome to listen to the discussion. Ms. Valenti, you're 100% correct. One of the advantages that we had said early on was that we didn't start school until after Labor Day. And it gave us the ability to watch things play out. And you are 100% correct. There have been a number of districts, and they all make the news when it happens, that have shut down for various reasons for different periods of time, or gone remote, or canceled football games. So I think having a discussion on that is truly beneficial, and I'd love to be able to get everybody's feedback. So I sent out there, we have not started yet. I can tell you this week, we've had 2 staff members that have tested positive for COVID this week. And so that they obviously are not at work. I think we've had 1 other staff member that has had to contact trace out. I think there was a belief that maybe contact tracing rules would change for us. And I know I emailed the board that I thought that there might be some changes. I've looked at those new changes. I can't tell a difference in the guidelines at all. It seems pretty much the same.
The interrupt said the guidelines, and you said the recommendation from legal counsel is to follow those guidelines.
That's correct. Mostly also for a liability standpoint as well. Anytime as a school, and most of you probably know this pretty well, when we don't follow who are recognized as the experts, if we decide to just kind of go on our own, that opens us up. Because the question that would come back to myself or any of us are, well, what is your expertise that makes you know better than these recognized experts? And I'm not trying to speak for any of us, but none of us here, to my knowledge, are health experts. So no, that is exactly what legal has recommended. And we're going to hear the terms recommended and required. And that is, and they sound pretty similar, but they are not. Those are the things that we do need to look at. To your point, Mrs. Valenti, with Senate Bill 22. Senate Bill 22, and just to make sure I can clarify for anybody, Senate Bill 22 states that obviously Governor DeWine and the health director back in the spring of 2020 executed a health order, and mask wearing and all that other stuff came, the lockdowns, all that other stuff. So the Senate engaged with Senate Bill 22. Senate Bill 22 limits the health director to be able to issue a health order for up to 30 days. After 30 days, the legislature can overturn that. Anything longer than 90 days, and the legislature would have to approve anything longer than 90 days. And so I want to make certain that I'm clear about the ambiguity that comes with this. The widespread belief is that those recommendations, kind of to your point, Ms. Valenti, will most likely not turn into orders at any point, because it could be undone by the legislature after 30 days. But it is, I do want to make certain it is clear as mud. The health director could issue an order for 30 days. That could happen. That ability has not been taken away, but there is a pretty widespread belief that will most likely not happen.
And so you're talking about they're not going to mandate masking. I mean,
Correct. I think that is the widely held belief.
so the order is most likely not going to mandate masking, which would always be then a highly recommended
Highly,
mask.
yes.
So
Strongly recommend, yes, whatever phrase they use.
just to keep it going through then, so
Yes.
highly recommend masks, not mandating masks. Can you take us through, if we're ready for it, what does that entail then for quarantine?
Absolutely. And there's been some, and I'm going to use some different word choices here because everything is in a name. So schools do not have the ability, we've historically been using the term quarantine. That's been the vernacular that almost everybody has used. Last year we said, well, we're going to have you quarantine. The reality is that schools don't quarantine. I don't like this word choice, but that what schools can do is exclude. So if I can use Maddox as my guinea pig next to me, what we can do is I can tell Maddox, because of contact tracing, and I can go back through that process in a second as well, through contact tracing, Maddox is excluded from coming to school. To say quarantine means Maddox not allowed to leave his house. I don't have the authority to tell Maddox that he can't leave his house. I do have the authority, or the board and myself have the authority to exclude. We've been using the term quarantine because that's just been a kind of a common terminology. So let's go back, and while we're at that, let's kind of talk about the contact tracing protocols. And I will tell you, there's an article in the Cincinnati newspaper that Warren County is doing a pilot program of a different protocol that could change things. But as of right, that's only for Warren County. So what I'm telling you about, and I know I joke with board members in emails, I can tell you what is effective at 1:30 on Thursday, September 2nd.
So based on having to follow legal guidance, what mandates us having to exclude? I guess, what makes us exclude students?
Is that it is strongly recommended, even per legal, that we follow the state guidelines for quarantine and isolation, but in our terminology, that's simply exclusion. So if I can use Sophia as my other example. So Sophia tests positive for COVID. And Maddox, and this board meeting would be a pretty good example of it, less than 3 feet away from Maddox. If Maddox is one of two things, if he is vaccinated or if he is wearing a mask, we still would notify his family, he would be notified that he is a close contact of someone who tested positive, but he would not be excluded from school. He could still keep coming to school if he met one of those two things, if he was vaccinated or wearing a mask, either one of those two. If he would, oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It doesn't matter if she's wearing a mask or not.
No, actually, it doesn't. And it's a great question. No, it is the direct contact. So if Maddox was not wearing a mask or was not vaccinated, then he would have to be out for 10 days.
10 days automatically.
Yes.
Can't get a test after 5 days and come back in if he's a direct.
There's a possibility that he could test and be able to get back in 7.
Okay.
That's a
But
possibility.
guaranteed out, guaranteed excluded for 7.
Yes.
Okay. And jump in if you have any questions.
No, and it's great that, Ms. Valenti, this is perfect to kind of walk through the whole.
Well, I'm trying to make sure that I
walk
have
through
all
the
the-
whole
where I'm
scenario
at.
of that.
I guess my big thing is, when we gave you that guidance, I think we were waiting for the governor and the CDC to do mandates. I think we were waiting, because it's easier to say, the governor said that. So now that they're only doing recommendations, basically, I guess my question is, what is going to be the criteria from the superintendent on if you have to close school? Or you have to make sure that the kids, I mean, just
No,
today, Carlisle is out today and tomorrow.
perfect. Yep,
New Lebanon's elementary's out, and then all these other ones. And you had contact probably with all those superintendents. And the criteria that they're using to make that big decision, that's a tough decision.
it is.
And I
So-
think that's where we need to know,
Yeah.
what is it going to take? And I think the parents are going to need to know too, what is it going to take that you make something mandatory or remote learning or whatever?
I don't know, before we jump to that, because I got a whole list of questions
Yeah.
based on that.
Yeah, okay, okay,
Is that all right?
whatever you guys
All
want.
right, so our classrooms, our administrators, our teachers setting up our classrooms where we can get more than 3 feet apart. So even if Maddox is unmasked, we can't be.
On many occasions, yes, but to say that we can be perfect at that, no. We are doing it to the best of our abilities, yes. And I think our teachers have done a fantastic job of trying to set up the rooms so that we can maximize that distance as much as possible. But there are occasions where that's, I'll be honest, it's just simply not possible. But we should have it, we've tried to set it up that using that scenario with Sophia and Maddox, that it would be the fewest number of kids that would be contact traced as we can possibly get to.
And you guys have done that in professional development, like it made it clear, like not to do carpet time or things like that, that it's going to get this.
We are doing our best to communicate with staff to try to make sure that we can try to maintain social distance as much as possible. But there are cases where it's not feasible. For example, when they do science labs, you work together on a lab, you're going to be together for more than 15 minutes at less than 3 feet apart. So
But if you throw a mask on for that lab time,
then it won't matter.
then it doesn't matter.
Correct.
So if you're in a classroom where you can get more than, is it 3 feet apart?
Yes.
Then if you take your mask off, then we wouldn't have to mask quarantine.
Correct. So using that example, we'll use me and you. I'm pretty positive there's more than 3 feet between us. If I was positive for COVID and you didn't have a mask on, you wouldn't be contact traced out, because it wouldn't matter if you were vaccinated or wearing a mask, you are more than 3 feet away from me. Now, we're still going to notify you that you were in a class with someone that tested positive for COVID. But because you are more than 3 feet away, you wouldn't have to do that. But I'm just going to be honest, it is not always practical to be 3 feet away. It's just not. I mean, there are,
When our classes change.
yeah, I mean, well, but the key for that is it's less than 3 feet for more than 15 minutes. So class changes and stuff like that. Well, our class changes don't last for 15 minutes, so That's not an issue.
Are we still cumulative or consecutive?
So the guidance, and I will say, the guidance is cumulative, but I will tell you, it's almost, you can talk to other superintendents, it's almost impossible for us to document that, to be able to track that. So Maddox and Sophia, I think they really actually are friends, but, so at school, I know that, okay, well, they weren't more than 15 minutes together at school, but then they hung out after school. I have no idea. So we can't, we've said we can track consecutive. We can do that pretty well. And I think we exhibited last year that we can do that very well. But the cumulative is just, it's just difficult. I mean, truly difficult.
I have 3 more questions, but I don't want to hold all the questions. Anybody else have anything?
You're on the roll.
All right,
Yep.
so contact tracing.
Yes.
I don't want us to have administration spending every waking hour of every day having to contact trace.
I would agree with
We
that.
have more important things that we need our administration to do. What I'm hearing from the schools that are having this is all they are doing is spending all day contact tracing to see who came in contact with who.
Yes.
What is our plan for that?
Well, depending upon how we go with things, I mean, if we don't have a mask mandate, then there's a very real possibility of what you've described coming true. And it is the administrator's job to do the contact tracing, to notify the people, because that is what we are tasked with. So I will say there are some schools to make sure that we stay balanced in an approach. There have been some schools that have been open so far, and I think they will tell you, they're knocking on wood, that they haven't had a mass outbreak of some things. That does happen, at least so far. I will tell you, I've talked to some of those people, and they're concerned that it can change like that. But no, Mrs. Valenti, what you shared, that's a real issue. That's real. But it's our job to do it. And so if that's what we have to do, it's what we have to do.
Sports, extracurricular, band, things like that. I want kids to be able to enjoy their sports, that we don't have to forfeit games
Yeah.
because of an outbreak or anything like that.
Absolutely.
Especially can you clarify, if you are responsible, so say we have an outbreak on the boys soccer team, or
Okay.
boys football team, or girls volleyball, or whatever. It's our fault that the game is forfeited. It counts as a loss towards our team.
I need to check with the athletic director on that. I think that you might be correct on that.
I think if both teams have to cancel, then it goes down as nothing. And it's maybe not as big a deal in some of the sports because everybody gets in tournament.
Yeah.
But for football, if
Yeah.
you have to take a loss because of quarantining, it's the difference of making playoffs or not making playoffs, or being able to participate in a sport, especially your senior year,
Yeah.
that you may or may not get back. So I wanted to get clarification on that.
So let me give an example of that, and I won't say the name of the school. There was one school, my understanding is that an assistant coach, and I'll say it was football, an assistant coach on a football team tested positive, and so because of contact tracing, the first and second team players at that position that the position coach was in charge of, all were contact traced out, and because of that, they couldn't play the game. That's my understanding of a situation in the school, but in case I'm wrong, I don't want to say the name of the school or anything, but that's my understanding of why one school had to forfeit.
And I think people need to be aware of that, because listen, if I'm the football coach, I mean, it's gonna make a difference to me, where I would like my players to be or anything like that.
Well, and obviously with extracurricular activities, because of physical contact, and they're not wearing masks during those, there's a possibility for contact tracing. But Mrs. Lane, I'm going to take what you're saying, and if it's okay, I'm just going to spin it just a little bit. There's a difference between, I don't know, we'll say volleyball player, and they're around other volleyball players, and the whole volleyball team has quarantined because of participating in volleyball, versus because they were in math class with somebody. There's kind of that inherent risk that goes with those extracurriculars, and I think that's pretty well known. And if you're gonna have one player out because of volleyball, you're gonna have multiple players out, and there you go. But I think it would be a lot more frustrating if you just lost 1 to 2 players because they happen to be in a class with somebody else. If that's okay to kind of twist it
No,
a little bit that
that's
way.
probably where I was going with, because we did have that happen.
Yes, we did.
We had, and then more important to that is the quarantine. Last year, when somebody had to quarantine, they could still Zoom into their classes.
Yeah.
We are not providing that this year, are we?
No, I say this regularly. I'm so proud, and I know we have 2 people from our teacher association. Our teachers, our kids, our parents were fantastic last year. And we all learned a whole bunch of things. And I would say we've learned some things to put in our tool belt that we can use every so often. But I think all it did was validate that for the vast majority of kids, there is no substitute for in-person learning.
But there's not even that, you're not, if you get put out, so if Maddox
Yeah.
has to go home, he's teaching himself AP Bio. He's not even able to have the ability to Zoom. I'm asking.
Yes, that's correct. And we'll have our teachers that'll do some things. No, shaking your head no.
Our high school BLT decided
Okay.
that we would make Zooms like a Google Meet
Okay.
possible for them if they want to show up.
So it is an option then for high school.
For high school.
For high
Right.
school,
Yeah.
for high school. I
But
don't know
and
if
I'm
junior
pretty
high
sure
is that
elementary
way.
is not the same
Yeah,
way.
intermediate, it's going to be just Google Classroom.
So they won't have the ability to Zoom in and listen to lecture.
It won't be a requirement for all teachers to do it that way. It will be Google Classroom.
We're also meeting, I think all the BLTs are meeting pretty soon this week to talk
Yeah.
about specific protocols in case all kinds of scenarios happen.
Well, I guess that would influence, I think, which direction we take, because, I mean.
Well, with
Maddox,
elementary
how to
though,
teach yourself
We're
chemistry.
prepared, we did it last year, I mean, if we had to.
What's
Well-
that?
I said we're prepared, we did it last year, so.
Well, we
Well-
didn't do it last year, but.
well, we also learned, and I think most parents would agree, there's a little bit of difference between high school and what they can do in a high school versus what they can do in an elementary. And God bless our elementary teachers, they work their tails off, but it is, if parents that have elementary kids, I think they would tell you, and please, I'm not criticizing the teachers or anybody, but it wasn't effective. We tried really hard, we really did. We tried, it's not the same. High school kids are a little bit more adept at technology than what elementary kids are. And so, I know we were just joking before, they're pretty good at technology though.
But so, not to interrupt,
Yeah,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
interrupt. So you're saying that the high school BLT, every teacher then is going to make available a Zoom?
A Google Meet. I'm not saying that it would be to the level that we did last year, but it would be there available if they wanted to pop in, ask a question, watch what they can see of the class or whatever.
So so Google Meet isn't necessarily like I have math class second period that they're going to sit at home like they did before and have access to every class that their classmates are in.
They would.
They would. So
Yes.
Google Meet is the computer's going to be on the whole time and they can ask a question if need. I mean, that's
Yeah.
significant to me.
But it's not gonna be that same way.
And even though we did that last year, I'm not saying that was like, that for someone who was at home, it was like, oh, this is just as great as being there.
well, and that
I'm
might
not
be-
saying
yeah.
it's not, but I
Yeah.
guess
That might
I'm
be where
saying
you
that
guys
if
would
you,
try
But there'll
if
be
you
something.
put kids out to quarantine, I mean, listen, if you're trying to teach yourself some of any class, it's difficult. It's difficult enough on a computer screen, but if it's like, sorry about your luck, here's your 10 days worth of work, see you in 10 days, that's the difference between an A and an F in some classes.
Well, I would hope that the teachers would work with them when they came back after the 10 days, that helped them figure out what they couldn't figure out when they were home by themselves. I mean, I doubt if a teacher's gonna give them a 0 if they showed effort, and I just don't see that happen with any of our teachers.
I'm not saying that the teachers want it, but if you're constantly having people quarantine out and you're still trying to keep the pace for the kids that are in the classroom, and now you have different kids coming back in, what did you miss?
You missed one? Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just.
I just double checked. Both of them were at home at one point in time while other people were in the classroom. So maybe you guys talking about your experiences with that would be very helpful in this
I just
conversation.
want to know what the options
Yeah.
are.
over the winter, someone in my house caught it, so I was out for 10 days. And then I think I was on day 9 and I caught it, so I was out even longer. And that was awful. I had a lot of trouble in my classes, particularly because I didn't know how to teach myself pre-calc, and I can't speak a word of Spanish. So I had to get in contact with my teachers, and even though they were doing their best, my grades definitely suffered. Some of my teachers too, like they had to exempt some of my assignments because there was no way for me to make it out before I was gone. And I was behind. I had to spend lunches going back once I was back in the building to go make everything up, and it just didn't function right.
Yeah, I never really got, actually I did, I was quarantined at one point, I forgot about that, but, so I was in like a similar situation where I was at home on a Google Meet while my classmates were in person, and it was better, I think it was nice to have the opportunity than it would have been to have had to do it completely on my own, but it was still, it just wasn't the same, and there's a difference, we can tell the difference between the beginning of the year when you're in person and there's people online, the reverse. There's a difference between like how the teacher teaches versus when everybody's in person, and it's just because they're great, but like it's really hard to do two things at once. And so if we can prevent that, then I think it would be very helpful to do that because it just isn't the same. But at the same time, I think it would be a very big ask to have the teachers to say, we're not going to do Google Meets, and then like when the students come back, then they have to keep track of like who's been out for 10 days and catching all of them up while teaching everybody at the pace that they're supposed to be going at. So I feel like there's no good solution to this problem, but doing the two things at once was a big hurdle for us to get over. So if we could do literally anything to prevent us from having to do that, then I think it's worth it.
I also think that if you're going to be quarantined and the schools may need to say no, then you should give them the opportunity to be in a Zoom call because some of my classes, they'd have to call me when they could, when I could ask questions, and it just helped me a lot. Like even if they were paying attention to the class, I was still able to watch. It was better than nothing. And I think I think my grade would have dropped a lot worse than they did.
Any other questions or comments for that section of questioning?
So I guess that maybe if you could give a little more clarity on expectations in the primary. I mean, if that's...
I think the primary is trying to work through that. I'll just say it is substantially more difficult at the primary level with young kids doing remote options. And yet again, I keep saying it, I'm so proud of our primary teachers last year, and they did some really clever and creative things. But it just isn't a substitute. I mean, we're teaching kids the very basics and the foundation of education. There are some kids that can do that remotely, that's great, but I don't think that's the vast majority of kids that can do that. So probably looking more towards, if we look at what other schools have done, having packets, the parents can come pick up and do some things, so probably something along those lines. I know that they are still trying to work on that. That's been something that we've been working towards. But I can tell you, if the question is this, whatever it is that we could come up with for kids in the primary school, it would, I couldn't even say that it would be comparable to what they're getting in the classroom. It'll be our best. It'll be our best. That I can promise, but it won't be comparable.
And before we get to Mr. Geglines then about when we would shut down, we have exemptions to talk about. So can you explain that to us, because we have not seen the documentation or anything. You said that
Yes,
you're working
working
with
with
legal,
legal.
so can you touch on exemptions?
Absolutely. So when it comes to mask exemptions, the CDC, their exemption, and if you want this is like for people wanting to fly or whatever, and even on a bus, there's required to be, the only exemption is a medical exemption, which is from a medical provider, a note from a medical provider stating that there is a health condition that dictates that a mask cannot be worn. That's the CDC language. So I'm going to kind of call that option. We're going to kind of call that option number one. That is the most restrictive of all the pieces. Yes. Then option number 2 is anybody says they want an exemption, you just give it. Period. They say that they have a reason for an exemption, you give it. I think there's some confusion about that. When Ohio issued the mandate last year, they provided for medical, religious, and I think there was a third category. I'm going to say philosophical objection, conscientious objection. There was a third category for exemptions. So the second option is just the parent says that they need an exemption, parent is granted. Third one is I'm going to call it kind of middle of the road approach, and that is you kind of take what you do for medical and you apply it towards those other ones. That there's some documentation that needs to happen. So take the religious exemption. That if a pastor said that this is a part of their core tenet to their faith, to not have that, pastor fills out a form, and then it's granted. That's kind of, I'm going to call that kind of middle of the road. Legal has said all 3 are viable. There is all 3 are legally defensible. And legal has also said that you can check around the state of Ohio, and all 3 of those options are currently in play around the state of Ohio. So there is not, I know it's our least favorite thing as a board. We like it when things are cut and dry a little bit more for us, but there is no, this is the, per legal, I should say, there is no set answer. That would be our discretion.
So you haven't, because you have not,
I've
since we have not mandated masking, you haven't looked at the exemptions because there's been no reason to look at the exemptions.
So I have been working, obviously the first one's easy, the second one's easy. So I've actually been working on the third one.
That's the one you've worked with.
Yeah, I've been working with legal on that. Because it's all about phrasing as well. We can't say things that would possibly get us in trouble. So I am now at a place where, based upon listening to the board's feedback, I can execute any of those 3 fairly simply. As far as making, and those would be legally supported.
Any questions on exemptions?
It's pretty cut and dry. Say exceptions that's available.
I guess my only concern is, and there is some case law on both sides of this, but, what do you do with option number 2, and you don't have to provide any kind of documentation? What's the point of mandate at that point? Or requiring masks at all if you can issue an exempt, like anybody for any reason can have an exemption? As opposed to the 3 in which you